one of the things that AI does, it feels familiar. It's almost like I've seen this. Like I have a feeling that I know this, but you cannot. It's all new pixels. It's all new, but it's based on ideas of how we've seen the world. That crazy space is beautiful.
And we are live. Hello, Alejandro. How are you?
Good, Hugo. Thank you for having me. Good.
So great to have you on the show. You are the first photographer in the podcast, but not the first Latin American. We had Maria Paula, who is from Argentina.
Yes.
You are from Mexico, right? Where are you right now, Alejandro?
So yes, I was born in Dominican Republic, but then moved to Mexico, and now permanently here. I'm in Monterrey, which is a big town just south of Texas.
Hmm.
Big industrial town. There's a lot of car building stuff, steel, beers. Tesla's doing a big plant here
Hmm.
this year, or next year, I think. So yeah, a lot of kind of a mixture of Pittsburgh and Detroit, if you're familiar with the U.S.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, and Monterrey is also I think the second biggest city in Mexico, right after Mexico City, and
it
right before Guadalajara. And
mm,
yeah,
it it's been changing. I would say that right now, I think we're the fifth largest. There's Guadalajara is bigger now. León, Guanajuato, I think is bigger. Or there's a city in Guanajuato, and then there's another in Querétaro, I
mm,
think is bigger. There, yeah, it's been crazy. Like these industrial towns have grown massively around Mexico. But yeah, it's top five. Yeah.
yeah, and economically as well, like there are many companies and there's a
Yes.
big sector there. Also because it's so close to US, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In economic push, yes, I think
Mm.
it's maybe the second biggest economically because of its closeness to the U.S. border. Um, yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm just checking that
It's okay.
everything is all right. But yeah, we got it working, Alejandro. This is the first time we are doing this live on YouTube as well. And so we're on Twitter and YouTube, and this is the recording, right? So we will later edit the episode, and everybody can listen on the different podcasting platforms.
Awesome.
And it's a good way, right, to do it twice, and also let people join the recording, which is more, I think it's interesting, right? It's more natural.
Yeah.
And Alejandro, I'm very excited to have you here because you are a super talented photographer. You have a career that expands, I think, over a decade, right?
Yeah.
And you have won many awards. You are in many, you are held in many collections, public and private collections,
Hmm.
and you also are an entrepreneur, right? You are championing photography through fellowship, and and to be honest, this is how I got to know you. You are also combining AI with the photography world through the post photographic movement, right? Which
Yeah.
I find that super interesting. So we have so many things to talk about today. But Alejandro, can you tell us how did you start? How were those early years as a photographer?
Sure. So I started my professional career more in the service industry. I have a bachelor degree in leisure studies. So in Spanish, it's a funny name, Administración del Tiempo Libre.
Mm.
That's the name of my degree, and I worked in hotels, restaurants, and mom and pop type businesses. And I also studied music, which I'm horrible at, by the way. But I did like 2 years of music, and I think that was kind of my looking for an artistic side of myself, which I feel was there way from when I lived in Dominican Republic. The school that I went to was very inclined towards artist ideas and critical thinking. So there was something there. I thought it was music, but it really didn't pan out. And then almost 10 years into my like career in the service industry, I started doing photography just as a hobby on the weekends, and then I landed in a workshop, like a theory workshop actually about photography and how to analyze images, and that workshop showed me that there was this whole world that you could build with a photograph, and that there's like a there's a whole world in what you can say, and there's a whole world of where that photograph can circulate and be distributed. There's photography museums, there's photography collectors, there's photography festivals, there's a whole array of genres of photography. And for me, that was eye opening, because for me, photography was what I found in my family album. And
Mhm.
that was it, right? And it was a storing of memories, and a storing of stories. And that just made me fall in love with the medium, and I left everything. I stopped working in the service industry, and I started doing photographs. And I felt I was late. I was 27, so I came in with a big rush, and I didn't want to do a second degree. I didn't want to go back to school, so the nearest thing that I found was working in a museum and an archive of photography. And that really was like my master's degree in art. I learned everything there was to do to be a photographer, how to do a project, how to do good photographs, how to print them, how to frame them, how to store them, how to conserve them for the future, how to write about them, how to display them,
Mhm.
everything. And I did that for 5 years at that museum. And ended up doing curations for them, doing like contests for them, bringing more archives to be donated for the museum. Like I learned all it you needed to learn to be a photographer in the realm of fine art.
Yeah.
Because I mean, photography, as many of the arts, have different ways in which you can practice. For me, it was about a photography as a fine art, as a medium of expression, of personal expression. And that, after that, I went and I did do a master's degree in visual studies at the university. I started teaching in university. I did that for 3 years. I was always passionate about books, and so I started my like doing self-publishing. And I eventually created an imprint, and I published Latin American artists.
Mhm.
And that's kind of like the start. In all that, I'm learning about photography, thinking about photography, and I'm doing my own art. And I've been really lucky that the projects that I've done have resonated with the general public and with the art world. And yeah, we can talk in parts of that, but the projects that I've been doing are long form projects. Sometimes it takes 5 years to do a project, sometimes 7 years. And I've been doing a lot of that for the past 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic, and I find very interesting that division or that clear separation between fine art photography and, I mean, there is of course like hobbies or things that people do for their own, but there is also, I mean, there are many people working as a photographer for different purposes, right? And actually that's a question I had. I wonder if you ever had like a job as a photographer, like for a magazine, or for, there are many jobs out there that require
Yeah.
photographers, but it seems like you from the get-go went through the fine art side, right? Is that correct?
Yes. So I did both. I actually I have a lot of work as a commercial photographer. The I think the interesting thing for my career was that because I was focusing more in my fine art practice, the commercial jobs that I were getting were very aligned to my vision of how I see the world.
Mm,
So I would do assignments for magazines, newspapers, from the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Washington Post. But most of the time, those commissions had a relationship with the work that I already do
mm,
as an artist.
yeah.
And my work, yes, it's in fine art, but it's kind of documentary. So it's an in between an aesthetic experiment and a conceptual documentary experiment. So it's not just pure beauty, it's beauty in the everyday and in social issues that somehow I felt attracted to talking about. But I bring not a journalistic vision where, it's not about telling the news, it's about a subjective understanding of the problem that is in front of me.
Okay, and Alejandro, that vision, that clear purpose that you're trying to share, that message, did you get that from the get go, or was that something that you formed over time because of things that were happening in your environment? How did you come up with that vision for your photography?
Sure. It's a mix of things. First, it's the place where I live. Latin America
Mm,
is a place where uh, there's a lot of social tension. There's a lot of urban tension, issues that are constantly making you feel vulnerable and in contact with everything that surrounds you. You don't normally live in a bubble where nothing happens to you.
mm,
You're always, if it's not a political issue, it's a social issue, it's an urban issue. It's almost like we are in a perpetual state of change and building. Latin America is not finished. It's always
mhm,
changing. And
yeah,
that, I think, was part of the inspiration for a lot of my work. In how did I become so, like, how did I perceive it? Because you can live it and not see it. But for me, it was that shift from the Dominican Republic to Mexico. It was this change of culture, even though both Latin American countries, they're very distinct cultures.
mhm,
And that shock really opened my eyes to, wait a minute, like, this is completely different to the way that I was supposed to understand the city.
mhm,
Uh, this is very different to how relationships happen in Dominican Republic and in Mexico. Why is that? And so the questions started to come out and come out, and then I became really focused thanks to the master's degree I did in visual studies, where we examine like everyday things and we ask the questions, why is this here?
yeah,
Why did this happen? Why do we see it this way? Why has art represented the city this way 100 years ago? Why is it different now? And so I prepared myself to ask the right questions, both empirically and theoretically. And that combination really helped me form the vision that I have for my art.
yeah. I can relate. You know, I'm originally from Venezuela, and I moved to Mexico City, to Mexico when I was 16, 17 years old. And as you said, it's very different countries. I mean, we speak the same language. It's Spanish. There are similarities, of course, but there are also very big differences, right? In
Mhm.
terms of the country, how things work, the culture, how people behave, and they communicate, right?
Yes.
And and yeah, you're right. Like Latin America is changing. I mean, it's always changing. I was looking at some, data, economic data from the 50s, the 60s. In this case, about Venezuela, and it's completely like. I mean, there are many reasons why, but it's changed so abruptly, and also in Mexico, right? So depending on who is the government in turn, what are the what are the things happening in the world, and how that affects Latin America in different ways. And that's a very interesting thing that you are, documenting, as you say, with your photography.
Yeah.
Um, and Alejandro, when you say some of your projects take 5, 7 years, why is that? What is the reason that they take so long?
Because one of the things that as I was practicing, I was also learning and trying to figure out what photography is as an art form. And one thing that I was obsessed with was how how were photographers constructing ideas of projects previous to me. And so when I see what was happening, say in the 70s, 80s, maybe up to the 90s, it was very much single-sided approaches to problems or to projects. So, there's a project on I don't know, a deforestation, and you go and you photograph deforestation, and you might stay there 6 months, 8 months, document that. But for me, what was more interesting was, okay, that is the surface of the problem. What else happens around that? Like, can I picture the town meetings where they decide what part of the forest is going to be torn down? Can I photograph and take portraits of the family members of the people who work in the logging industry? Can I then photograph the houses where those logs are being used in? And so it's a building of a project that is very much aligned with, I think, our information society in which we live, where there isn't one truth. There's many truths. So I want to, in as much as I can, present a project from 10 different perspectives. And it's in those 10 different perspectives that the poetic starts to emerge. Because for the first time, it's like, oh, yes, I'm talking about deforestation, but have you ever thought of deforestation next to town meetings? And then that's like, oh, I didn't see that relationship. Well, this is my like poetic proposition,
Yeah. Yeah.
you see these different things that you are not connecting, hence you can't understand the problem in a different way. Yes, you might be awed, like, oh my god, that's an amazing image, but that's the surface. When you see all these other like problems or situations or causes and effects next to each other, then that's the proposition. That's a new way of thinking contemporary photography as
Right.
as a layered proposition in line with how we see the world today. I mean, we're the Google generation. There's, you type in house and there's a million answers to what house is in Google, right?
Right.
So as an artist, like, we are supposed to not offer answers but points of views. So here are 10 points of views of the same issue. So it takes a lot of time to
Yeah.
get that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine you need to schedule it pretty well. If you want to go into these town meetings, you need to know when they happen, right?
Exactly.
And probably you need to ask permission, and they will be like, "Hey, but why is this? I don't." And also like photographing people, that might
Yeah.
be you need their permission, right? So there are
Yeah.
so many things that play a role, and I guess the logistics of all
Yes.
these. How because now that you are very well established, I can imagine you have more resources, right, to go on more challenges and more, let's say, yeah, complex projects. But early on, Alejandro, how what were the things that were complex or challenging in the early days compared
Yeah.
to now in the position you are these days? What would you say was complex,
Yeah.
challenging?
That's a really good question, because it's definitely not the same to, like, when you're an emerging artist, to build projects than when you have a little bit of a track record and maybe some sales support and institutional support. It's just a whole different ball game. For me, I had no, like, I was all in, maybe a little bit more than I should. I was just, I'm really obsessive. Like, I don't do things halfway. So that was an extra value that I would bring to my building of my career. I would just not think of anything. Every single dime that I was making in any commercial work or working at the museum, everything went back to gasoline, traveling, buying film, developing film, printing, and just doing all that I needed to do. And it was a big sacrifice. It was, I would say, 5, 6 years of absolutely just devotion, absolute devotion to my
Yeah.
practice. And I think it accelerated my path,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting awards and scholarships, and no, not scholarships, grants from businesses, from the government to do my work, because I showed a lot of dedication and a lot of results.
Mm-hmm.
So by the second year, I mean, not even the second year, by the first year I into being a photographer, I had already a solo exhibition at a museum. I had a book deal. I had a traveling exhibition that went to 5 museums around Mexico. And that was only 1 year into my practice. But
Mm.
it was just, I was obsessed, and I'm still am. Uh,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah. And of course, there were many no's. Like, I was knocking on a lot
Mm.
more doors than I do now. But it was a challenge, but I just felt that I had to do it. Like, I had no option. It was
Mm.
that, or just boring myself to death
Yeah.
working at a restaurant. So I was like, no, it's all or nothing. I was 27. I felt like I was late into the game, so I was like pushing, pushing, pushing. And it did. I mean, I did not live of my art until 6 years into my practice. I did get a lot of recognition and a lot of exhibitions, and I was published in magazines and newspapers, but I was making zero money. Like,
Mm.
it was just money to do more art.
Okay.
And then eventually, when I started working with galleries, that's when I had a little bit of more, I would say, holgura, like a little bit more of
Breathing room.
breathing room, yes, to think of bigger projects. I started traveling and doing projects not only in Mexico. I started going around to different countries. But it's a path, and it's, I mean, I see a lot of the people that I started with at that time, and they're not in art anymore. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a path that is nice to many people.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. And you have to be obsessed and believe that this is the only thing that you can do in your life
Right.
to
Right.
to be able to support the hardships and the dry spells. I mean, yeah, it's really
Yeah.
fucking hard.
So basically, you didn't have a plan B. It was the only path you wanted to pursue. And
Yes.
but Alejandro, you said you were knocking on doors, getting a lot of no's, but you were knocking on doors. And I'm wondering. You said you got grants, you got support from the government, from companies, but
Mhm.
this is also a lot of a big amount of logistics and knowledge that you need to know to knock on those doors, right?
Mhm.
Where to knock. And how did you learn this? Because I feel like many artists, and I've been talking to many artists, and that's not clear, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, you make your art and maybe you share it, but that's not all. There are other ways, right? There are other options. And how can people, artists, learn this? Is this something they taught you in a school when you got your master's, or this is something you were talking with other artists that made it? How did you learn this part of the process to
Yeah.
actually execute it?
So there's several answers to that. One is curiosity and the lack of opportunity being in Mexico and trying to be part of the art world. That,
Mm-hmm.
some people can see it as the worst condition to try to be an artist, but for me it was the perfect opportunity, because I was in Mexico. Things are way cheaper here than in New York,
Yes.
LA, Paris, London, etc. And I was trying to break into those markets, like to be seen there, exhibit there. But I had this backing that I didn't need to make that much money to be able to play in
Mm.
those arenas. So that was a strategic thing, because I was getting invitations to go to these cities, but I was like, I don't think. I mean, I'm just gonna kill myself if I try to do that,
Yeah.
because it's just so expensive and the competition is so fierce.
Mm.
I can still compete, but from the fringe. It implies 2, 3 more times of work
Mm-hmm.
compared if you're there.
Yeah.
That's the honest truth. But it's affordable to do it. So that was one strategy that I did. And then and how I learned it was by putting myself outside. I scrutinized how to be in the inside. So I paid even more attention to how the system works, how the art world works, asking questions to my peers, looking at how they're selling their work, how they professionalize everything. Like I mean, again, there's no other way. You have to be obsessive about this shit. And then the other thing was my strategic decision to not go to university, but to go and work at a museum. In the museum, everything happens. You have grant proposals for funding for the museum. You have curation that is happening there. You see how the curators work. You see how they write. You see how they develop an exhibition. You see how they, talk about scale, how they talk about printing, how about they talk about technique. So I was there, it wasn't my job to do those things, but I was like 100%
Hmm.
listening in and paying attention and working sometimes extra hours just so that I can learn all
Hmm.
the things that you need to learn to be an artist. So that was also another strategy. And then just self education. Like I was reading a lot of books about the history of photography, the history of art. And I was listening to a ton of interviews from artists. That's something that really, really helped me because in those interviews, they talk about their practice, why they're doing what they're doing. They talk about their hardships. And in those conversations, I'm like, oh, that I relate to that. And it's like I'm building this toolbox and adding from this artist this, from this artist that, from this artist that.
Hmm.
And I built, a kit that helped me survive and thrive in the art world, even being from this town in the middle of nowhere, and have a voice in the mainstream, which is, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm there. I'm still el mexicano inside of the art world. It's not an easy thing to be an outsider, and to be a Latino. You always have to battle extra everything, but that's fine. That's what it is.
It makes
And
you unique. It makes you unique
yeah,
as well.
yes, it's you can see it as, again, a cumbersome situation, or you can see it as an opportunity. And I've decided to see it as an opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think it's very very inspiring for many Latin Americans, right? That maybe are in their 20s and they are going through what you lived at those years. So very very interesting. And Alejandro, we went through your beginnings, right? How you got interested in photography, all you went through, how were those 5 6 years? But then, I mean, you are also a very established figure in the digital space, in the NFT space. So I wonder, how was that? When did you discover NFTs? How did you enter this new world? Let's call it that way. How was that? Uh,
Sure.
when would that happen?
um I think the seeds were planted when I was actually working in the archive. But I'm gonna give like a little bit of background. Eh, I was like, my main job was digitizer of the archive. So I was scanning photographs from the 1800s up to the 21st century, and that was the dawning of Google Maps and the internet as this place of information and sharing information. And for me, I remember in 2005, I started several projects where I was using the internet as a camera. That was my train of thought. I was going to places that I couldn't photograph, and using the internet to compile collections and ideas. And right from there, for me, I saw the potential of how you can build projects through the internet. And then I would say in 2000, maybe 2012 to 14, I really got into the idea of being a like having my main presence through my website. So that was another like opening, and it was because my partner, she's a psychoanalyst, and she's been trying to put psychoanalysis in like the mainstream of Mexican culture, and she was trying to break the system. How do I like imbue it into the internet in the realm of Mexico? So she was thinking of like all these things, and I had no clue that the internet had it. And so that really focused me in the idea of the website as a publishing tool.
Mm.
So it's a tool to distribute art, and that and it worked. Like I started getting jobs from around the world because of my website, and I was like, that's really interesting. And a precursor to the idea of NFTs, I was being commissioned to do digital images, JPEGs. I
Mhm.
would send them through the internet, and I would get paid with digital money on my bank. And that's literally the NFT model. You
Yeah.
sell a JPEG, you get paid digital money for that. So right from there, from 2012 to 14, when that started to happen for me a lot, I was like, yes, this is something that there's an opportunity here. And then I created the Carpoolers project in those years of 2012, 14, and I experienced for the first time virality in the
Mm.
internet. That project went viral many, many, many times, and it was something that like I had never experienced. Like the amount of people reaching out, and the amount of connections that were happening, and the amount of value that those images were creating as digital images was fascinating for
Mhm.
me. And so I that's all that like I that was like again the seed of for me my digital journey. But then in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I had like two solo shows in the US. I was going to be part of two big art fairs in Paris and New York, and everything got canceled.
Mm.
So it was like, oh shit, like what am I going to do now? And, all these things that I had planned just went to dust. And I was just sitting in my home drinking drunk all day for a couple of months. And somebody reached out from WeTransfer, a good friend. He said, "Hey, there's a company called Foundation
Mm.
that they're thinking of selling digital art." I'm like, "Oh, interesting." And they're like, "Would you consider something like that?" I'm like, "Yeah, the Carpoolers project has been circulating as digital art for a long time. I think that would be a good solid project to offer." And so I sent them three images, and of course it didn't sell because I had no clue what I was doing. We were, I think, maybe 10 artists on Foundation
Mhm.
at that time. It was like a beta, a try for them,
Yeah.
and it didn't work. And maybe I was there from August, September, October, November. That initial website was gone. Like it didn't work anymore, and I just didn't follow through. And then in January 2021, I started doing a lot of TikToks, and a lot of people started talking of NFTs. I'm like, wait a minute, that's what Foundation was doing. And so I emailed them back, and of course I saw the new website, and I'm like, oh my god, this has exploded.
Yeah.
It had become something like huge. And so they're like, yeah, but you need an invite. So I started to look for invites,
Okay.
and eventually found an invite with a photographer, and I got on the platform, and I minted three pieces. Back then, it was crazy expensive. I think I spent 400 per mint, four hundred
Wow.
dollars per mint, and then another 400 per listing. Because you
Yeah.
used to
Yeah.
just mint, and if you want to put a buy now or put it for auction, you had to pay again. So that was like $3,000 for three
Yeah.
NFTs, and it was a lot of money. So that's all that I could do at that time. And of course, nothing. I sold nothing because, and now in retrospect, I understand I had no clue what I was doing. Like this was a new culture that had emerged, the Web3 culture. that I had no idea how it worked, what it was about, what was the philosophy behind it. I understood my value of my digital work because of the virality part of it. I was like, if these images have circulated through the internet, it means that people value them as digital
Yeah.
objects.
Right.
But that idea was not exactly aligned with what the value of an NFT was. And it took me months to really take another deep dive and basically start my career from zero. It didn't matter that I'm in the SF MoMA, in the Getty Museum, and all these private
Hmm.
and public collections. It was like, no, like
It doesn't
what
matter.
what do you mean in this new
Yeah.
world? And
Hmm.
so I think I came at it with no respect at the beginning, and then I understood, no, wait a minute, like if you really want to be a part of this space, you have to respect it, understand it, and find a way to entice conversations that are aligned with the values that are shared in the NFT space or the crypto space at large. And so it took me to, again, become obsessed. What is this
Hmm.
place? What does it mean? How does it work? What are the historical precedents to it? And I think by the time that I was ready, like mentally, I found sales, and it was, it was a good amount of sales and success with the Carpoolers. It sold out in about a week, and I was collected by people like Deafbeef, Luis from
Hmm.
FingerprintsDAO, and yeah, a bunch of like really, really important collectors in the space that immediately showed so much support for what I was doing. And that made me stay. I was like, wait a minute, like this is huge.
Hmm.
Like this is not an amazing opportunity for me as an artist, but for the art world at large. And I've always wanted to offer or be part of something that opens opportunities. Maybe because of my of being an underdog and being outside,
Hmm.
I was like, this sounds like a place where we can offer opportunities to more artists.
Right.
So that made me just fall in love with the space and think, okay, what can I do to help others find the opportunities that I just found
Hmm.
in the space?
No, that's such a interesting journey. I think it's a good proof that it was not just about being there at the right time, right? Because you were there pretty early when
Yeah,
Foundation actually had, you said, like around 10 artists. It was a beta product, but then you came back and then you tried again and you had to pay this crazy amount of fees and you didn't find success, but
yeah,
then you persevered there, right, and tried again until finally you found your people, you found your crowd. And I think that's a recurrent theme in general in the space. So many people think it's, oh yeah, you were there early and that's it, and that's not necessarily true. um, in
yeah.
that project, Alejandro, I really wanted to ask you about Carpoolers because I think it's such a unique, special, and as you said, has this virality, and it's clear why. Um, but can you tell us how I mean the idea of it? And you said you actually created that project back in 2014, 12,
Mm-hmm.
2012, 2014. Um, and then it lived through the years, and actually you ended up minting it in the blockchain later, so it
Mm-hmm.
has a special story. But the
Yeah,
story behind it, like, what was it, Alejandro, that made you create Carpoolers?
sure. So in 20 in at, in 2010, I started the master's degree and finished in 2012. And by that time, I had a lot of projects, and a lot of projects had to do with the city of Monterrey and how it was being suburbanized, and it was growing in like a rapid, crazy rate. It was also at the same time that we had the drug war here in
Mm,
Mexico, and it was really, really a bad situation here in the north of Mexico. So there was a social thing happening. I would say that I wanted to like find stories that talked about different ways in which Mexico is built.
mm,
And the projects that I had done were of houses and like suburbs and people that were dreaming the American dream of home ownership.
Mm.
And one of the problems that comes with home ownership is transportation. So I would witness them trying to, travel to the city by bus, by car, and it was really, really difficult for a lot of these people. And it took me 2 years to find like a way to really, really show how difficult it is to live that dream of owning a house in the outskirts of the city. And I was commissioned by a research institute. It's called Colegio de la Frontera. They wanted to see how people use cars in the border
Mhm.
here in Nuevo León, which is the state where Monterrey is the capital. And they gave me 12 research papers. I read them, and basically I was going to be like their illustrator of the issues that they were addressing. And I started doing a lot of things. I started driving to work with people and photographing that. I started photographing traffic. I started documenting how people park their cars. I started photographing how people pimp their cars and make them, nice. All these like different ideas of the car. And while I was photographing traffic, I was like on bridges and buildings looking down at the traffic. And in one of those days, I just like peered down and I saw a carpooler. I saw a construction workers in the back of the truck, and I boom immediately photographed them. And that's actually carpoolers number one, is the first photograph that I did of the project. And I was like, oh my god, like this is something that is part of the Latin American culture at large. I mean,
Right.
the idea of traveling in the back of a truck
Mm.
is something that all Latin American countries share, and North American countries too. Maybe more in rural areas because it's illegal to do it, but
Yeah.
it's an experience that I think a lot of us have experienced. So I felt something interesting was happening there. I maybe took one or two more that day, and I was on a commission, so I didn't have too much time to think about it. But later, like I would say, like maybe 2 or 3 months later, I went back to the images. I didn't continue the project. I was
Okay.
like, I just took the images. I came back to the images, and I started to like think, what did it really mean? What is it that I'm looking at?
Mhm.
And slowly, you ask these questions, and sometimes you don't have the immediate answer, but it's you ponder on them, and eventually things started to come up. It's these are the people that live in the houses that I had photographed 5 years prior. So
Mhm.
there's a connection, like a storyline that adds to what I've done before and where I'm going. And then where are they going? They're going to work to one of the richest parts of the city that I had also photographed for another project. I'm like, okay, here's a
Mhm.
connection between one project and another project. And then, like, personally, this image reminded me of my grandfather. He was a construction worker,
Mhm.
and all his life he would travel this way. He had a Ford
Mm.
F-150, and the people would show up at his place, and he would put them in the back of the truck. So it was something that I had witnessed from a young age.
Mm.
So that for me, and again, this is an obsessive person saying, I'm going to do a project because there's relationship
Yeah.
with what I'm photographed. I can't do something and not have something
Mm.
connected with it, either a project or personal. So
Mhm.
once that was I convinced myself of that. I'm like, okay, the project is there. Let's go do it. And so I would go once or twice a week. Mondays and Fridays were the best days, and I would be there from 7 in the morning to 9 in the morning, and just stand on a bridge, one
Mhm.
lane. And it was luck because there are 4 lanes, and sometimes they're going on the other lane. So
Okay.
I would maybe get 2 or 3 good photos a day, and that's
Yeah.
it. And I would just go back, go back, go back. And after a year, I think I accumulated a good amount, about 100 really
Wow.
good photographs. And then it was like, okay, there's a project here. And then there's something interesting about that I want to mention about photography. You think of photography as this tool, or this like artistic tool that is art when you see something that's captured that's amazing, right? And that's a heritage from Cartier-Bresson, a French photographer, that talked about the decisive moment. This photography becomes poetry or art when you capture something that has many things happening at the same time, but it's almost impossible for you to capture that. Then that is the sensibility of being a photographer, that you can see all these
Mm,
things happening and you're able to capture that moment. But as photography grew older, that kind of like slipped out, and it's more about, can you actually build a story from many different parts? And yes, here and there you have decisive moments, but it's in the consistency of having 100 good images where the real photographer comes to play.
mm,
Because what has happened is that everybody now is a photographer. I mean, here's my
yeah,
cell phone, it's a camera, everybody's a photographer. So how do you say that you're a photographer and show that you actually have a vision? Well, you develop a project and you show that you didn't have a lucky shot. You had 100 lucky shots. You know,
mm,
you were looking for these precise moments. And so when I build the carpoolers, you know, the first 2 or 3 images were amazing. And I could have published that and it would have been, oh my God, those are amazing images. But that wasn't a project. That
mm,
was reportage. That was like, oh yeah, that's how lucky was Alejandro. But no, if you dedicate and you like pursue something with dedication, then the repetition shows that this isn't a coincidence. It's actually somebody thinking of something and pursuing the production of that idea. And
yeah.
that for me is where you go from being just a hobbyist to actually being an artist photographer.
Right, right. No, that's amazing. I mean, that's a fantastic explanation, Alejandro. So many things in mind, like what you said, this phenomenon of, the construction workers going to work. It's something that's very typical from America in general, because I live in Europe and it's very hard to find these pickup trucks. It's like very, very uncommon thing.
Yeah.
Um, in the fact, I mean, in a way, as you said, it was hard to get some good shots, but it's so common that you can take 2 or 3 in 2 hours, right? So people
Yeah.
can get a feeling they are not from America. How often we see these pickup trucks, right? In going, as
Yeah.
you said, to work in different places. But yeah, that's very, very exciting. And one question: this idea of the series, the big collection in photography, is this a common thing, Alejandro? What you just mentioned, or is this something rare that you find a photographer that has 150 photographs?
Mhm.
Is it common or not so much in the photography world?
Yeah, let me, I'll give you a little bit of context to how I think this came to happen. And when photography started to become institutionalized and people wanted to be a photographer and go to university to study photography, you can't graduate with 2 or 3 good photographs. You have to say what you're going to do during the whole semester. You
Okay.
have to say, this is my thesis, this is my idea. I'm going to go out and pursue it. And you can do it at the beginning, or you can just be out there photographing and then come back and say, okay, this is what I'm doing because of what you captured. You either do it at the beginning or you do it at the ending. But that institutionalizing of photography made us pass from being a decisive moment photographers to project photographers,
Right.
where it's the sum of the parts that is what is important and not just one good image capture.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and a great example. I mean, moving forward to the fellowship, which is something I really want to touch. Um, right, the collections you have released there. It's a great example of this series, right? Like these collections that have, a story behind it. And I really love fellowship, especially the post photographic, series, the series that you have started recently. Can you tell us how did that idea start? How did that start fellowship, and what is it about for those that aren't familiar?
Sure. So I want to mention, you pointed out this idea of the series and you asked, is it common for this to happen in photography? That was actually one of the things that I felt an instant like relationship with the NFT space,
Mm,
because everybody was talking about collections and these grouping of cohesive images. I'm like, that's exactly what we do in
Mm,
photography. This
right.
is the way that contemporary photography works. It's about building projects, and then you release a book or you release an exhibition. So instantly I was like, yes, this is the digital version of how we already practice
Right.
photography.
Right.
This isn't an invention. It was like it's the way it is right now.
It,
So
yeah, it worked that way for photography, but if you look at art, paintings, or different kind of art, that wasn't the case, right?
no,
Except for generative art, which is
exactly.
it's also working that way. Yeah.
Exactly. Painting is a little harder because of the timing
Mm,
but there are like painters that do work in series. A lot of the pop art artists worked in series, but it's not the common, right?
right.
And the series is maybe 15 pieces or 20 pieces
Yeah.
at the most. But anyways, back to how did fellowship form in 2021 after I had, done the sales with the carpoolers, and then I like committed myself to do as many projects as I could to really understand the different mechanics of how NFTs can be made and sold. So I started experimenting a lot. I went even to do like a photo book where I was selling a paper, like a page of the project. So if you wanted to buy the NFT, you would buy page 1, 2, 3, 4 from the 100-page project. I played with image and text. I mean, I did a ton of different projects. I did exhibitions in crypto voxels, on cyber. I did everything that I could so that nobody would tell me, oh, what is it to do NFTs? It
Mm,
was like I want to feel that I actually know exactly what I'm talking about. And after that process, I was like, okay, now that I've like lived through all these different iterations of how to do NFTs, now I can actually offer other artists the opportunity to come into the NFT space with the knowledge and experience that I have. And so I had this crazy idea. I'm a collector too, like physical objects. I buy photo books. Like I'm obsessed. I buy a ton of photo books, cheap and very expensive. And I had this vision of if NFTs, like if these artworks, digital artworks, are one of one pieces, there's going to be just one opportunity to build the best NFT photo collection in the world. There's
mm,
only one opportunity. And whoever is crazy enough to do it, they're going to build the best collection ever. And so I started talking to several collectors, and I ended up reaching Studio 137. And he collected some of my carpoolers and from the other projects. And he was a big generative art collector at that time. And I told him my theory that there was this opportunity to look for the greatest photographers of the world and help them mint their work and buy pieces from their collections to build our collection that will be unrivaled.
mm,
And he was crazy enough to believe me. And we started doing that. We went out to the, like, my heroes in photography. I went and I knocked on their doors and I said, hey, we're building a collection. It's a once in a lifetime building of a collection. We will support you in like the technology of how to do your smart contract, how to mint, how to be like all that you need to do your NFTs. We'll help you with all that. We'll give you the support. We'll put in the funding to mint and everything. Cause again, at that time it was still expensive, and we will collect stuff from you. And so we started doing that for artists that we just really admired and knew that as soon as those NFTs would hit the market, and we were really optimistic, everybody would want them, right?
right.
Because we thought everybody was going to know, oh, these great artists, oh yeah, everybody's going to want them. And of course, it's not like that. But we believed in it, like from like super believed in it. So we started doing that. We started buying and buying and buying. And what happened was that the artist didn't get any traction because they had no idea what Web3 was. right?
Mm-hmm.
So they started coming back to us and saying, hey, would you consider maybe selling the rest of the collection for us? And we would give you a commission if you sell that. And we're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay. Like, that's an
Yeah.
interesting, thing. We were
Yeah.
just going to be buying and building a collection, but
Okay.
this way we would be able to sell work, gain a commission, and buy more work. So
Mm.
it was building a self-sustaining building
Right.
of an art collection.
Right.
And because of my experience with the museum, working with galleries, I knew exactly how to build a relationship with an artist,
Mm.
how to build contracts, how to like make everything so that it's professional, so that everybody gets paid and everything works out. So that's what we started to do at the beginning of 2022,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the program right now. In reality, we collect a lot, and we try to support artists that we love and that we
Mm-hmm.
want to buy from them. That's the only reason that we're selling, is because we want to buy from them, because we believe in their art.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very particular organization compared to what's there in Web3, where platforms mainly just sell.
Right.
That's their mission. For us, is we sell what we want to buy. Like, we sell the stuff that we think is the best of the best.
Mm.
So that, I think, shows a different way to build an NFT platform project. And the proof is in the pudding. Like, the projects that we do have very particular mechanics or ways, even design wise, UX wise. Like, we want to buy in the platform. Like, we build the platform that we want to buy
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
It shows. It
Yeah.
shows clearly that it's very custom to
Yeah.
each particular drop, right? And it keeps the quality very high as you are collecting as well. So I was not aware, to be honest, about the collective part. That's very, very interesting. And how many, Alejandro? How many shows? How do you call them? You call them shows or releases? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I would call them releases, collections. We've done a ton. I mean, maybe close to more than 50 up to now,
Okay. Yeah.
with a varied, like, our main thesis is photography is the most important artwork of the last 200 years.
Right.
Photography changed everything. It changed painting. It changed installation art. It changed sculpture. It's changed drawing. It changed everything. And not accepting that is foolish, because it really did. It changed the world.
Yeah.
Social media is based on photography. Education is based on photography. Advertisement is based on photography. Like, this is the thing that transformed our world. And so we take that as a premise, and we think, okay, how does photography relate to AI? How does photography relate to painting, to digital painting? How does it relate to generative art? And we try to find artists who are
Mm.
willing to think in those premises, or that are already thinking in that way. So, like, the project that we did with Dmitri Cherniak, it's about how photography was an art form that started the idea of automation. Like, it was the art form that where people were using mechanical means to create images that were not touched by the hand of
Right.
the artist.
Right.
So, and there were artists in the 1910s and 20s, especially Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, that were thinking like the camera as an automated machine that, without the presence of the artist, creates an image, and
Right.
it's a compelling image. And he was doing these things called photograms, where you don't use a camera. It's all in the Lightroom, and it's just like a light sensitive paper. And he would put shapes and objects on top of paper and create an image without a camera, but it was a photograph, and it was a ready-made, an automatic
Mm.
image that didn't, there was no drawing, there was nothing. It was like automation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we thought of that, and we saw Dimitri's work, and we said, hey, like, we were already selling work by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, and we told him, look at this work. There's a big relationship between you guys.
Mm.
Would you consider doing a project? And that ended up being Light Years, which is a
Yeah.
beautiful project that is acknowledging that little gesture that photography did. It didn't pursue it. Let's say it's not the main thing of photography, but it was there. Like
Yeah.
it was an inception moment of thinking of automation through photography. So he saw that and he delved right into that and traveled around the world, meeting the family of Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and going to the archive, going to the collection and all the stuff that they have in Switzerland, in the US. And he built a beautiful collection. So that is thinking of generative art and photography. And then AI started to happen. And we both, Studio 137 and myself, we had already been collecting AI
Yeah.
stuff, not for fellowship, but just individually. And I think it was November 2022, we started collecting Roope
Yeah.
Rainisto's work. And we started building a relationship with him. And I remember telling the team, everything's going to change. Like when I started seeing Rope's work, I'm like,
Yeah.
that's it. Like there's no turning back. Photography is going to change. Art is going to change. And, you know, and the rest is history. I mean, we started a beautiful relationship with him. He introduced us to ideas, to other photographers, and we started building like the AI arm of fellowship that, again, the premise is that AI is a consequence of photography. Like we've
Mm.
lived under 200 years of this hegemonic power of photography as the main thing that creates images in our
Mm.
world. But we overpopulated our world with photography. And what are we supposed to do with trillions and trillions of images?
Right.
Feed it to a machine that finds patterns of how we've pictured the world, and
Mhm.
that machine will now help us see the world in an ordered way. So AI wouldn't be here if it wasn't for photography. So that's why we're so like enthusiastic about it. You know, it won't kill it. It's going to transform it. It's going to bring new questions to
Mm.
the forefront.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, amazing description, Alejandro. That's so insightful about fellowship and from the inside, how you're thinking about it, and it's really, truly, truly inspiring. And I cannot let you go without asking you, where are we going in that area, in the AI? How do you think these tools are going to affect art and what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing with fellowship, your art practice? What are you expecting? What do you think will happen, let's say 5, 10 years from now? I know it's a complex question, but
Yeah.
you can run your mind, like, be completely free, and share your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a vision of the future. I have a curiosity of the present and the relationship with the past. Um,
Mhm.
I would say that's where most of my time and headspace is at. Um, I think that what happened with photography in the 1880s was that you had for the first time a picture making tool that became democratic, that more people had access to than ever before. And yes, there was a pencil, there was pens, and yes, all that existed, but it wasn't a full picture.
Mhm.
It was, you had to technically learn how to do a drawing to composite something that can relay a message. With photography, this leap forward into a machine that could create a full image, a full articulated image, was groundbreaking. It was crazy. Like it really transformed the world. And so that access was something that was very important to rethink ourselves as a culture, as humanity. It let us see things that we had never considered in science, in culture, in space, in the micro level. And so my interest is this new picture making tool, because that's what it is. It's a picture making tool.
Mhm.
The interesting thing is it's from like natural language to image, and that's the strangeness. Like we had never witnessed that before, and
Mm.
that's why people are so. It's too simple. Well, yeah, it's a different thing. It's language to image. It has to be. You are right in that it's uncomfortable to think about it because it had never happened before.
Right.
But the opportunity is that more people are now going to be able to consider themselves as picture makers. Yes, we have the phones and people are doing photographs, but it's about picturing reality. Here we have the opportunity to picture imagination. And that is a whole new
Mm,
problem that we're building for art and for culture as general culture, because we are picturing imagination. The
yeah.
right now, the I would say the 90% of the images that are done are photographic, and they have a relationship to reality because they're photographic. In the next 5 years, the 90% of the images are going to be imagination based images.
Mm,
What is that going to do to us as a culture?
mhm,
Where the most images that we see are based on imagination and not facts and not reality. What does that mean? I have no idea. I'm scared, I'm excited, all at the same time, because I don't know. I generally don't know, but that a change is coming, it's coming.
yeah.
It definitely I you just have to see the last 100 years and it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind
Yeah.
of
No, no,
where
that's
my head's at.
I really love that quote that we're picturing imagination. That's fantastic. And yeah, who knows? Who knows? But there will be a change. That's clear, and in many areas, right? Not only in arts, in many other areas around the
Exactly.
world, affecting everybody. And thanks so much, Alejandro, for your time. This was very, very insightful and inspiring, to be honest, and to learn about your journey. And before we close this episode, there is always a question I like to ask the guests, and it's about artists. And who will you say are artists that inspire you? Could be photographers, could be AI artists. It's up to you. It's very open. But yeah,
Mhm.
we would love to learn from you. Who are those inspirations for Alejandro?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm so inspired and obsessed with the artists that I'm working with in fellowship. We just launched the daily.xyz project, and it's all AI video artists.
Mhm.
And I am just like, I'm getting so many highs when I'm seeing these new artworks, because one of the things that AI does, it feels familiar. It's almost
Mhm.
like I've seen this. Like I have a feeling that I know this, but you cannot. It's all new pixels. You
Yeah.
know, it's all new, but it's based on ideas of how we've seen the world. That crazy space is beautiful, and I love working with the artists from daily.xyz, because they're always coming up with these crazy things, and that for me is very inspiring, because it's the art of today, and I've been obsessed with history. Like I'm
Mhm.
a geek when it comes to the history of photography and art, but I'm now transitioning to being obsessed with the artists that are doing things for today, and that 1 week they're obsessed with something and in 2 weeks they're doing something completely
Mm.
different.
Okay.
Oh my god, that's so fascinating. I
Mm.
love to see that, and that they're taking risk. And because in particular like this daily project, it's an experimental space. Like they're not like they're not answering to anybody.
Right.
There's no expectations. It's like, use these tools and go crazy, go as far as you can. That brings such freshness to art, because there's no commitment. It's just about experimenting.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I'm getting a real high with that right now. And
Can you
that
name a few of those,
sure.
Alejandro, of the upcoming projects?
Like, I mean, I don't want to name too many names, because I'm gonna miss out. There's 30 artists that right now are part of the project. So, but people like AI.S.A.M, he's doing some amazing, crazy stuff. Julie Wieland, she's an artist from Germany. She's like experimenting with not like the technical parts of AI, but more the storytelling part of AI. Just amazing stuff. There's an anonymous artist called Mindwank, who's amazing. He's built this mini series, for me, the first AI mini series to ever
Okay.
exist. It's 10 episodes,
Ooh.
and it's all about chickens. And it's very absurd, but it's it's amazing. If for everybody listening, go and take a look at Mindwhack. Who else? I mean, there's just so many. Eh,
But
let
that
me.
that's okay. We got the quite a few names, and
Okay, okay,
and
okay.
it's
Good.
no worries. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that exhibition. I'll look at it right after this, and yeah, the video thing is amazing. I've seen also Roop. I always get confused on how people pronounce his name. It's either Rupi or Rope,
No,
Rope,
it's Rope,
Rope. Okay,
Rope like Robert, but
okay.
Rope.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I've seen him experimenting with video and the
Oh,
different, like a movie, like a whole movie, and it's fantastic. So,
he's at the forefront of it all. I mean, he's been at this for 3 years, and the level of experimentation and knowledge is outstanding. We're more than honored to host his AI video stuff and
mm,
his still work at Fellowship. He's always. I mean, I think he was one of the first artists doing also video, like I maybe 6 months ago or 7 months ago, that was I was like, what is this? Like, how in the world are you doing this? And then he started creating the stories, and that was a game changer. Like, I felt that there is the a new genre is being born in front of us right now. That's what's happening. And what is that genre? What is the themes that people use in that genre? What are the styles? What are the techniques? Nothing is cast in stone. And that's why it's so exciting,
mm,
because everybody's doing different things and everybody's trying to position themselves. And there's no, this is the way. And because there is no, this is the way, there's massive opportunities to people come and experiment and question. I don't like this, but I can do this. I like that. I can now do this and add this to that. And like now in the daily project, there's artists collaborating that are meeting in the project, and they're like, oh, I
mm.
want to do something with you. You do good music. You do good editing. Do good storytelling. I'll give you the images. You do the editing. You do. And that's, I mean,
Do you think
that
this it would be like sorry to interrupt you, but do you think it would become like films? Like people can create their own films, and it won't be seen as art purely, but more like TV shows or movies. And think we're
this
going in
is
that direction. Mm,
this is the big question.
mm,
We don't know what AI video art is right now. Is it a continuation of video art? Is it music videos?
mm,
Is it what? We don't know. Like one of the artists that we work with, it just did a whole AI video for Cuco, the Latin American singer, and it's with AI. And there's another one of the artists is working with a very big band, and all the video is going to be AI.
wow.
So they're doing music videos. Then you have like people like Rope who are doing basically shorts. They're like
Yeah.
short
Sure.
stories.
Yeah.
And we have Sandros, uh, Pierre from the Daily Project. He's done several like longer form
Mm,
videos, films that have been part of the Tribeca Film Festival, and it's including AI already. So it we this is the exciting thing, is that it's not formed yet. We
right.
don't know what it's going to be, and maybe it's just going to be everything at the same time. And you're going to see AI experimental art, you're going to see music videos, you're going to see long form films, and documentary films maybe. So yeah, we're here to experiment and to see what happens. And that's the I think that's the beauty of what the project is that we were seeing that it was happening all over the place, and we gathered all of the artists together.
Mm,
And you can come if you want to see what's happening in AI video today. You come to daily.xyz, and you can witness
right.
all the different styles and uses of the techniques at the same time.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I love to close the episode on that. In that feeling of what's coming, and the possibilities are endless, as you said. Alejandro, thanks so much for sharing all these with us, and I hope to have you in the future again in the show to see what you're up to and how these things have evolved. Right? Maybe in a few 1 2 years from now, a few months, and we see what's changing and what's the state of AI. And yeah, let's stay in touch. And thanks so much, Alejandro.
Thank you, Hugo. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.